Okay, so at the request of a commenter, whose account appears to have been deleted, gotta stop getting into letterbox drama, man, you're a better writer than that, who also attempted their own list of this type. I didn't see their list. I really am profoundly indifferent to other people's lists. I know that sounds very snotty and needlessly haughty, because it is. My criteria was looking at the films on the TSPDT 2026 list and deciding which of the films there I most disagreed with the acclaim surrounding. I tend to feel that most of the canon generally deserves to be there, although there are a relatively small number of exceptions. I avoided placing films which are evidently, so to say, not my thing. I avoided targeting musicals for this reason, as well as certain old Hollywood comedies as well, and films which I do feel are a bit overrated but have enough going for them that it doesn't bother me them being placed upon that list. There ended up being quite a few films which I have a certain distaste for, more so than 10 at least, and so rather than naming any honourable mentions beyond the 10, I will potentially upload another video in future naming the 20 to 11, say, if anyone is curious to know what those might be. I chose just to keep it at 10 because what's the point of a top 10 if you're just going to list 11 to 15 as honourable mentions anyway? At times I decided to just place a certain director in the ranking slot because 3 or 4 of their films could be placed on the list. To preserve space, I lumped them all into one. I did the same for a certain theme of films in my initial listing of films I consider overrated, although that entry didn't ultimately end up making the final 10. This is just my opinion. It is worth mentioning that there are a number of even many films on this TSPDT list that I do not like, but I figured it wouldn't be considered that controversial for me to state that Titanic, Slumdog Millionaire, Paul Haggis's Crash, or even something like Cinema Paradiso is overrated, as I've seen those opinions stated many times before. If you are wondering why a certain film is not on this list, chances are it might be in my wider extended list, which I can reveal in a subsequent upload, or I deduced that everyone considers it overrated to the point where I feel validated enough and that it might be actually rated fairly sufficiently. Most film fans will agree that Titanic is not as good as some critics claim it is. If I stated here that I felt as though something like Forrest Gump is overrated, how many of you would actually disagree with that? How overrated can it still be if more people, certainly among film enthusiasts, seem to agree with my rather lukewarm reception to that film? I was also trying to rank these based upon the scale of adulation the films in question get versus the quality of the films themselves. One entry might be inferior or superior from my own perspective to a title ranked below it, although it might be more adulated in the wider film discourse, and so I place it higher or lower upon this ranking. This is Gerald Bruckner's list, not AOD's, because I'm not confident AOD won't get into trouble for really stupid, unnecessary reasons due to some of the things he says in this particular upload. So without any further ado, 10 films or filmmakers that I find to be really quite overrated and who I feel don't deserve the level of praise that they appear to sometimes, or a lot of the time, receive. If you like or admire these films and want to mount a defense of them, go ahead, although at this moment in time, the following films really do not impress me, and if it weren't for the sum of acclaim they receive, I wouldn't have thought twice about some or all of them. 10. Do the Right Thing and Spike Lee in general. Okay, for social reasons, it seems like an obligation for a lot of people anyway to place Spike Lee on a great film directors list, even if most people are only familiar with a small handful of his films. He is thought of as the first great African-American author who brought a distinct cultural perspective to American screens and has received a place in history as the black director, potentially the token black director, although he's enough of a media magnetic troublemaker that he'd never be confused for a mouthpiece for an establishment, except maybe during the Obama era. A lot of people like Spike's films, find them entertaining. They bring up this film, claim it's arty and that it taught them things they really should have known already before seeing the film anyway. If you're my age and you claim this film taught you anything revelatory, that's on you. It shouldn't have taken Spike's film for you to realize how repugnant racial prejudices are and even how they initially begin to manifest and emerge. They also like dumb slops such as Inside Man, try-hard actor man dreck such as 25th Hour, not to mention garbage like Black Klansman for those insipid, ooh, the 70s, ooh, audiences, and for white people to be all like, oh yes, I'm going to watch and appreciate this thing about black people, yes, and I'm going to tell other people about it, mostly, or all other white people, yes. I don't want to sound too insensitive or reactionary here, but so much of this crap is black media for white liberal audiences to feel like they've accomplished something. It's such a blatant grift, and maybe black audiences get something from these works, but I can point out that I firmly believe that most white people are simply pretending that they do. Lee has directed some excellent films, or at least the 1992 feature Malcolm X. Its strength as an involving, immersive biopic cannot be denied. Its subject is one of the most compelling Americans of the 20th century, inescapably compelling as a writer and orator, regardless of whether you agree with their opinions or not. Lee must be applauded for some utterly seminal documentaries. 1997's Four Little Girls, and then 2006 is When the Levees Broke. Lee may be at his best when sticking to clinical documentary journalistic facts, not composing little fictional escapist fare for white people to feel like they did something. No, learn the facts, feel guilty, this is still affecting a portion of the population today, and you're never aware of it, will never be affected by it, and partly don't want to be aware of it, so you can just carry on your day and not worry about what you perceive as other people's problems. I may be lost on some of Lee's films, particularly on the comedic or dramedy end, as I'm not an African American. Actually, not even being an ethnic issue, many American films displaying white culture by comparison are equally quite lost on me. And it must be said, it really must be said. First of all, Lee is no Charles Burnett. He's no Haley Jerima, born in Ethiopia but spent much of his life in the United States. He's no William Greaves. He's no Bill Gunn. He's no Marlon Riggs. He's no Gordon Parks. If you want to call me an insidious epithet because I'm questioning the acclaim of an African-American film director, I'd love to know, Mr. or Mrs. Slander Others so I may appear virtuous. Do you know any of those filmmakers? Who cares more about the continuum of African-American film directors, the one who's familiar with and thinks that those fellows are complete geniuses? Or you, who follows the dictates of the culture, and would have in the era of racial tensions in the US, which is to say, you wouldn't have been in the minority supporting the civil rights movement, you would have followed the cultural bandwagons and expressed skepticism of it. How am I supposed to assume any differently if your anti-racist stances are informed by the current culture and not by your own independently arrived at principles? I cannot assume you wouldn't have done anything except what the then current culture dictated then, which was not encouraging the general public to support those civil rights marches. Respect for Lee's public support for Palestine, but I don't have to like someone's films just because I admire what they stand for outside of their films. But onto Do the Right Thing in particular, I don't see any revelatory takeaway in the film's script. Maybe racial relations were really that backwards in 1989, given the racial attitudes of certain white people who were coming of age at that time and are older now. It doesn't surprise me that generation was far less aware and sensitive than my own, still pretty imperfect, generation, at least by comparison. I don't find its particular choices regarding camera angles to be overly innovative or just impressive. I consider the film's choice of having the protagonist Mookie be an amoral, ethically ambiguous worker just trying to get by gives the film a way out of sharing or just thinking of any meaningful stance on any issue. It offers nihilism and cynicism, and a side character exclaiming that everyone else was wrong. What were we supposed to learn? Spike, literally, is Mookie, knowing he can't change anything, so just trying to make things work for his microworld, but he knows that a higher morality proves his behavior is selfish and inconsistent, despite his evident suffering, and that character who spits the truth at the end, is routinely depicted as a fool, silly, during the rest of the film, implying that Spike believes only figures such as this will share a moral stance, assuming that no one else in his situation would. Well, Spike wouldn't know. He wasn't delivering pizzas. He was directing films in California, assuming that those lowly pizza delivery boys would have as cynical attitudes as Mookie. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Spike deciding to distill to the public that they do really doesn't portray young African-American men in a very good light. He may claim to have been trying to be realistic, but sometimes a film can take a stand instead, and act as empowerment to those that aren't nihilistic and do hold greater values than those expressed by protagonist Mookie. Lee's script claims a realistic window, but leaves race relations the same as when it started production. This is meant to be very impressive, but its evident conclusions don't relate much to the world outside the screen. The inferred conclusion is, oh, Spike Lee is a good director, somehow, for pointing out the issues of the world, while not offering any encouragement against it, beyond the expressions of a designated fool character. That's the film's message. The alleged brilliance of its auteur, not anything that he proposes that could or can happen outside of the corners of the cinema screen. But it's about race relations, so I guess I'm obligated to think it's a great movie. You are free. Go watch Killer of Sheep, Ashes and Embers, Shirley Clark's films. Go watch Symbiosacatoxoplasm Take 1. Go watch Ganja and Hess, Chameleon Street, Marlon Riggs' films, or just those of Gordon Parks. If you feel obligated to praise Do the Right Thing, don't bother. Heap your praise upon some African-American cinema that really actually deserves it. Let's place more praise on Malcolm X instead. Let's not even exclude Lee from this discussion. If we weren't just praising films because we agreed with their social politics or because of their proposed significance as a cultural progressive watermark, would we really have much time for Lee's Do the Right Thing? Perhaps it is so distinctly American that it is very appealing to American audiences. I can't deny that the Indigenous Australian equivalent, were it realised in an imaginative, effective, compelling way, would be a film that I would very much love to watch, for instance. Although yeah, as a non-American, it just doesn't excite me really all that much. So, sorry, I hope you can all somehow forgive me. Just don't try to ruin my life. Convince people that you're a good person some other way. Rescue some kittens or something. Go participate in a charity fun run. I don't know. Just leave me and the rest of the population alone. We're not able or obligated to find every film ever made to be impressive, let alone ones which distill the most basic or non-existent of messages to racial harmony. And I'm supposed to call it genius because you're going to call me a bad person if I don't. This may disturb you, this may disappoint you, but we live in a democracy, or are supposed to, and if there is any speech not allowed in a democracy, it is speech that calls for action, it is incitement for actions against others. So if you want to claim that your bullying brigades over the internet is free speech, it falls way too far into action, into denying someone else the right to speak. So think again, or, well, think for the very first time in your life, rather. Number 9. Haneke's Funny Games. Right. So, what reason does anyone have to praise this movie? It's not that people praise this movie, it's who praises this movie. Snooty, elitist, European bourgeois rodents who turn their nose up at as much as possible. But when Haneke does it, oh, it's brilliant, it's transgressive, it's so insightful, it's actually really progressive, or whatever the fucking fuck. If the kind of weirdos who like Last House on the Left or Sallow like this movie, I have less of a problem. If you're the kind of person who likes it just for the gore, like it's one of those guinea pig things, I understand that there is more of a conceptual basis for Sallow and that Pasolini was a genius. I hold Sallow in a higher tier than other films in its designated extreme bracket, even if it is not at all one of my favourite films. I don't get the people who scoff at everything as much as they can, but because the home invasion ultra-violence is in this movie, because the violence against women and children is in this superficially distinct context, oh, it's actually brilliant. I just think it's a fraud. If this film has no reputation, I dismiss it as shock fare and move on. Given that it is hypocritically adored, I have to address and also attack it. No way would they be adoring me if I directed this kind of film. But what, just because it's Haneke, it must be actually brilliant? His reasons for doing it must be more ingenious than those other films doing this kind of ultra-violent maliciousness. I think Haneke believed in his own genius too much here, and anyone with any trace of humility would have shot this idea down in their own head. I don't think that the behaviour on display in this film is artistically justified. Morally, we can have a discussion about that, although as cinema, I do consider it to be genuinely, completely valueless. And I do think Haneke is brilliant outside of that, or those rather, films. Most of the time, I find less impressive certain features, like The Piano Teacher, or even 2009's The White Ribbon, almost the most acclaimed of them all, perhaps. But they certainly have a lot more going for them than either of the fucking Funny Games films has going for them. Let's play a game. Pretend this film doesn't have a reputation. What do you think of it? Exactly. Stop showing off. Grow up. You want to be transgressive? Go run around naked and shout every prejudicial epithet you can find over Google. Go in or go home. Stop this look at me enjoying this snuff simulation. Hey, how about you boast about watching snuff? What is that too transgressive? Is that beyond fun edgy and into I'm scared people will isolate me edgy? Go ahead. Do a thing without considering what other people will perceive you as. I dare you. Are you capable of it? I kind of hate this film, although like I said, mainly because of the reputation, I don't give a stuff about the content. I find it extremely uninteresting and unpleasant to watch, but that just goes without saying. It isn't interesting on paper, and it isn't interesting in execution either. I'm not the biggest fan of Last House on the Left, and that wasn't trying to be a statement on anything by comparison to Haneke's features, so even as horror fare, the idea really doesn't greatly impress me. I can appreciate, as I said, aspects of Sallow as a film, although Sallow was explicitly attempting, and is overtly, without any pretense of subtlety, trying to relay the connection between secular authoritarianism and certain practices of conscious, let's say, deviance. How one doesn't arrive at an embrace of authoritarian domination without the allure of sadistic gratification, and how it is an illustration of a primeval urge as much as it is intellectualized and more politely justified by the authors of certain philosophic books. Whereas Haneke's vision is not coherent or evident upon the surface, as Sallow's is, and Haneke's decision to attempt subtext, as opposed to the more implicit psychological insights on display, with no consideration or need for subtlety, any pretense of subtlety would have somehow made Sallow more profane, in Pasolini's feature, whereas in Haneke's, it is totally pathetic. It is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard for a film, and you'd all feel the same way if you weren't filling in the premise's emptiness with the prospective substance of Haneke's other films, inserting fingerprints all over that ghastly home invasion, or worse, hearing it was acclaimed and deciding to join the sickening bandwagon which was established by the pre-existing admirers of Michael Haneke, and deciding to consider it brilliant for reasons of its acclaim, and not even because you admire Haneke's films. You haven't even seen the others yet, and you can't comprehend, as opposed to, there's the Haneke fans who just simply can't comprehend he delivered something so innately empty. But and then there are those who might not know Haneke, watch this film, but they admire it because they like the idea, or claim to admire it rather, because they like the idea of there being an intellectual credibility to enjoying, boasting about, appreciating a film about a sickening, disgusting home invasion. In any other context, but boast their progressive credentials and condemn this as misogynistic, disgusting, and oh so untoward. The fans of this film are just full of bullshit. Either their polite sheen is just a disguise for what they really want, to consume media of such rank and sadistic violence, or all of their values, artistic preferences, moral insistences, and the superior way of thinking, all of these are determined by what will make others perceive them a certain way. What will make others think that they're as far from lame as is possible. Maybe Haneke's quest was to expose them, a la the Ern Malley hoax in Australia during the 1930s, although I still don't think it was an interesting undertaking, a compelling feature in and of itself that exposed them. Any prospective snarkiness is made irrelevant via the fact that the film is simply not particularly captivating or even impressive as a filmmaking experience, or even, I would argue, as an act of filmmaking as well. I really have no time for it. I wish I didn't even have to explain myself here, because this damned film really shouldn't have any attention upon it in the first place. It's an edgy teenager attempting to stun the world with their privileged amorality, and there's so little reason to justify having this content as your film's runtime. Maybe the 1977 film Fight for Your Life could justify it, but I really don't feel this way of either of Haneke's Funny Games features. Again, if you weren't told you were supposed to find it brilliant, you wouldn't give a stuff at all, and I don't necessarily feel that the admirers of Sallow are guilty of this, but I firmly believe that of those who admire Funny Games, and if I ever meet one of you in real life, I hope I can hold myself back from spitting in your face, for I might not even want to hold myself back.
Number 8. The Great Dictator. Oh boy, I'm actually putting a Chaplin film on here. What is wrong with me? Chaplin is a genius among geniuses. How could I do this to him? Of the 11 Chaplin features, or 12 if you count the 1959 anthology of shorts, the Chaplin Review, the only two I don't much care for are King in New York, which didn't seem to be as widely acclaimed, so I saw no reason to bring it up here. Well, it didn't even make the recent TSPDT 2026 list, and then this title, The Great Dictator. I'll admit to liking Monsieur Verdot and also Limelight a little less, but I still admire enough about them and have a desire to still revisit both in future. This is not the case with The King in New York, and definitely not the case for The Great Dictator either. The slapstick is really strong, maybe even some of Chaplin's best, and I appreciate him still sticking to his guns, committing to another tramp of sorts, silent cheer, well, not silent, but the tramp slapstick cheer, even as the 40s rolled along, the 30s proving that the silents were really well and truly done, and at a time when the world really needed to laugh, some escapist voyage to rescue them temporarily from what many would consider the most painful 6 years of that century. There is something which I really like about that. I certainly liked the idea of it, and it was part of what seemed appealing to me about The Great Dictator prior to my ever having actually seen it. I don't like this speech at the end. What sentimental twaddle. In the context of the story, the Jewish barber/tramp character is impersonating the titular dictator and convincing his nation, giving the orders to cease invading a neighboring country, and maybe this speech is really fine enough in the context of trying to use rhetoric in a really desperate attempt to sway the hearts and minds of your people. He just has to say what he can to emotionally stir them in a positive direction, and so he uplifts them with platitudes and appeals to a higher morality which may or may not exist. But really, it was Chaplin breaking the fourth wall and appealing to the people of the world. The message was fundamentally nothing more than, "Aren't I, Charlie Chaplin, such an oh-so-very good person?" I'm sorry, at a time like that in world history, how can you say that? We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. These words mean nothing to anyone except those not embroiled in the war. Those embroiled in the war didn't even get a chance to see the movie until the war was over, I'm assuming. You're doing a film about Hitler and you think that, oh, deep down people just want to help one another? That's your conclusion? In this world, there is room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Well, I don't know if I much care for these, oh, the world used to be nice, and now it has been sullied in some way. Most people on the planet were suffering at any given time, and still are. A larger and larger minority, over time, lives in relative prosperity, and yet it is they who control the narrative of what it was like to live in a certain time. I remember once that Fred Astaire got really angry when he saw that Herbert Ross American remake of the Dennis Potter British TV miniseries, Pennies from Heaven. He got very, very angry. It was an innocent time, not like that depicted in that frightful film. Maybe for rich, privileged you, Freddie, most of the world was living in fairly sordid conditions. Some criminal behaviour was engaged in, some not-so-innocent procuring of companionship was pursued, and the world wasn't a reflection of one of your fucking musicals, which is the main reason why people went to see the fucking things. I think it is a speech of the most empty sentiment. He just says nice things because he wants them to be true. I don't agree that humans have these innate positive qualities to them. I think we can develop, and I think we can grow together as a species, but lots of growth was obviously required in the first place. It is just for people to share over the internet so other people think they're good people too. It's so empty. I feel like I'm being conned with the adulation over this stupid fucking speech. And this moment is considered a paragon, a shining moment in film history. Really? This is not impressive. We are setting our standards too low, not being critical enough of the great glorious leader Chaplin. Well, as much as he is an incomparable genius, he's allowed a dud. Yeah, I think that the great dictator is that dud. You can sue me. I don't know how Chaplin could have deduced these binary, sentimental, affirming platitudes about human nature were worth sharing, or were profound or insightful, or even at all true. At this time in history, he simply mustn't have known the scale of the suffering people were going through. Oh wait, it turns out he didn't. To quote his 1964 autobiography, had I known of the actual horrors of the German concentration camps, I could not have made The Great Dictator. I could not have made fun of the homicidal insanity of the Nazis. That more just goes for the film's sense of humour and focus on comedy, rather than the sentiments expressed in that speech, for I strongly suspect that he would have felt this way about the empty rhetoric of that speech too, had he known the extent of what people would learn afterwards about the blood-chilling crimes of the Nazis' vicious carnage. I mean, how many of you actually like this movie? You didn't grow up with it.
You all came into Chaplin later. You were told they were classic. You got the appeal of the silent comedies. I mean, who doesn't? And then you saw The Great Dictator and chose to like it out of a sense of loyalty. This is what a true film fan is supposed to think. But do you actually like it? Do you really appreciate it, or is it just out of a sense of obligation? I did say I wasn't going to pick on old Hollywood comedies, but given my adoration otherwise of Chaplin, it seemed apt to place this here, because the films listed in this overrated ranking are films which, given how they are referred to, I thought I would like. I was never surprised I didn't like musicals or old Hollywood comedies. I don't really like much film comedies in general, although I didn't think I'd have such distaste for a Chaplin film. We really need to have a sea change on this one eventually. We need to just stop pretending to like it. It's a relic. It's a tradition of older generations of film enthusiasts, the acclaim for this film. We have no obligation to keep that going if we are not personally, honestly impressed by what the film actually has to offer. 7. Last Tango in Paris. I admire Bertolucci immensely at his best. His films prior to this title I have a great admiration for. 1962's The Grim Reaper, then 1964's Before the Revolution, The Conformist, and The Spider Stratagem in the same year. You would have thought that Bertolucci was the next great European auteur, though sadly the remainder of his career would completely dash this hopeful prospect. Okay, so even without the sickening knowledge of what went on behind the scenes for this film, I would argue it's not a particularly impressive or profound feature, although why I placed it so high on my extended list of overrated films is due to the general reverence it seems to be still treated with, in an age where even a passing, perhaps sexist remark in an older film is sometimes caused to condemn this film, where learning of a director's personal politics will completely reconfigure how a certain trendy pod people wing of the cultural intelligentsia assesses a certain filmmaker and or their films. I do find it baffling that a certain moment in this film, the most well-known, the most infamous, and it really actually should be, has been called by the actress in that scene a recorded document of her being sexually assaulted, molested, coerced into an albeit simulated, but still an act which entails sexual contact, an explicit sexual act, and that she felt very violated by this scene, and that had a profoundly negative effect upon her. And I wonder how many of the same, sort of trigger-happy, cancel culture-adjacent types are willing to condemn this film. Maybe more than I realize. I actually did a little bit of research, and I came to realize that this is intensely controversial film, as it ought to be, although at some point in the mid-2010s, this was not quite the case yet. People hadn't really got around to this film. Maybe they just weren't aware of it. I don't know. It is one thing to learn that an instance of sexual violence occurred off-screen during the production of the film, which one would have no idea via viewing just the film itself. It is another thing for the sexual violence to be on-screen, displayed in the finished film, and passed off as a simulation of discomfort and violation rather than the absolutely criminal act that I think it is. What makes it criminal is her being coerced, pressured into a sexual situation by her, in this case, employer, insisting that she do something that hadn't been discussed before, had never been agreed upon, indeed was not at any point in the film's script. Whether this would be an illegal action were it not a case of employer-employee demanding, that may be debatable. It depends whether you think pressuring someone into a sexual act is a crime. None of us will disagree that this is extremely unethical, though, to the point that it might be justified to shun the perpetrator from polite society, even if their action does not break any existing laws as such. How anyone who claims to stand for progressive values, to champion women's rights, and to consider sexual violence among the greatest evils this species is capable of, how anyone who claims these beliefs can admire or give a pass to this film, it really escapes me. Either these individuals are moronic, lying about their commitment to said progressive causes, or they like the idea of gaslighting people, in which case both their progressive beliefs and their admiration for this film are efforts to gaslight people, their entire existence devoted to garnering reactions from people in the most putrid, vapid, tee-hee-hee fashion, insidiously amoral, without any sincere opinion or observation of their own. Even without that scene, forgive me for not being compelled over a film about old, scaly Marlon Brando having an affair with a 19-year-old. That's not a pitch that would inspire me to fork over any funding for, I have to admit. Maybe there's an Eric Romer film or two that I gave a pass to which featured similar content to an extent, although I think I would have remembered as perturbing a moment in those films as occurs in the runtime of Bertolucci's picture. After this film, Bertolucci never reached the heights of his earlier titles, and though I do appreciate 1900, I can never defend it from the accusations that it is bloated, and I also really love 1988's The Last Emperor, just as a film I can get swept up in the sheer majesty of it. The production values carrying the entire runtime, I'm a great fan of it. Other than these two, I have been meaning to watch 1990's The Sheltering Sky again though. I consider the later portion of Bertolucci's career to be a really abject disappointment. Why anyone would think this film is brilliant at any point, it utterly escapes me. How can you want to watch this brand of love affair on the screen? Is there something dangerous and transgressive being explored here that we must celebrate the bravery of its director? Okay, if you want to say this is a film like Louis Malle's Murmur of the Heart from 1971, or even, as I mentioned before, a couple of Romer's films, there might be something to be said for that. Malle and Romer humanize their subjects to an extent that we ultimately understand how, as vulnerable, flawed flesh. Another example might be found in Hitoshi Yazaki's 1991 film March Comes In Like a Lion. The characters make their choices, and you certainly can't confuse Malle's film or Romer's for being mischievously, consciously edgy or naughty, whereas clearly Last Tango is getting a kick out of being transgressive. Compared to those aforementioned French auteurs, or the Japanese auteur in the case of Hitoshi Yazaki, there isn't a humanist, empathetic bone in this director's, in Bertolucci's, body. If any film actually deserves to be cancelled, it really might be this one. No, really, how many people have been put off by Polanski's Tess because the protagonist suffers sickening violations like that which Polanski himself was guilty of in the years leading up to that film's release? Some are willing to praise Polanski's films after that evil action, some aren't. Those that are still hover away from Tess, as though the assault occurred behind the scenes of that film. Would they have a problem with Last Tango, which features an on-screen violation in psychological, moral terms if nothing else, of its lead actress? I don't really believe in what is called cancel culture. I believe in freedom of speech, and I think that shutting down other speech is not an exercise of free speech. It is an action which is prohibiting another's right to speak. However, I don't believe it ought to be legal to depict sexual violence unsimulated. It ought to be as illegal as the criminal act itself, and we ought to condemn any film wherein a performer was sexually coerced by the director, their employer, to take part in a sexual act, in particular if that act is included within the finished film. I feel no shame in morally condemning this film. If the so-called SJWs have a valid reason for going after any film, I actually think that it might be this one. No, this one goes too far for me. Again, I will insist that even without the scene, I don't find the film very interesting. Sexuality can be an overrated topic where any narrative profundity is concerned. The taboo nature of sex as a topic has convinced some that it must be an avenue of significant excitement where thematic exploration is concerned. But really, sexual topics never should have been taboo. I believe that topics related to sex should be considered not edgy, not empowering, and certainly not profane, but simply uncontroversial. Relishing in the idea that sex is edgy is too much playing into the old taboos. Either sex is something that people shouldn't be ashamed of discussing, or it is something which must always have a conservative old guard disapproving of it. Some seem determined or excited by the idea of the latter, but why we should like the idea of sex or sexual content being controversial for its own sake is really just totally beyond me, I'll admit. Delighting in the prospective controversy of sex just seems really desperate and now outdated to me, frankly. And delighting in the fact that your film about an age disparity defined sexual affair is very controversial and naughty is just odd and immature. If you conversely felt as though, as a director or writer, that your story was about humans and ought not to be considered controversial but a valid exploration of human behavior, of how we form connections, that would be one thing. But obviously, Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris is very far from that. Number 6. The Tree of Life. So, with this, I have no problem with what it was attempting to do. I have no issue with this film's evident ambitions. Many people who hate on this film sort of know they'll hate it, right from knowing the premise, almost intend to hate it. How dare someone be this pretentious or whatever? I don't feel that way. I welcome any film attempting to do what Tree of Life does, or is trying to do. I think that that's perfectly valid. I'm even excited to see films that seem this ambitious. And in the context of me first viewing this movie, I really actually was. I was a fan of Terrence Malick. I had admired Badlands. I had absolutely loved Days of Heaven. Just loved it. And I was also very fond of The Thin Red Line and also The New World. I fully anticipated to love The Tree of Life, Malick's most acclaimed film of all, even considering those initial four. And though it seemed pretty divisive a film, it was seemingly loved among Malick's fans, and some were placing it in their top 10 greatest films of all time lists. I had no reason to assume I would dislike The Tree of Life at all. And I really didn't get much out of it. I will say initially, I came away with a great distaste and considered the movie terrible. I was bad-mouthing it for quite a while. Really, I was so taken aback by the acclaim and what I saw as people's idiocy that I reacted really very harshly to Malick's film. I will say though, had this been a totally unknown film without any reputation and I were to see it, I would think that it was fine overall, but that it didn't move me too much and didn't find it very memorable. It wouldn't even occur to me that people felt that this might have been the most profound film they've ever seen. That's crazy to me. No one has ever even explained to me why. Had Malick's 4 prior films been unknown, and I had seen them, I would think, these are incredible, especially about Days of Heaven. Why don't people seem to know about these? With The Tree of Life, I couldn't imagine it catching on. It has big stars in it, Brad Pitt, Sean Penn, that one would assume that it would be remembered in some capacity, seen in some capacity, but I would never imagine it occupying such an exalted place in the film discourse, or it certainly did at one time, I felt. I have to place it this high because its reputation way dwarfs my own views on it. I would call it a passable film, but the consistent, I'll presume, adulation, it gives me no choice but to place it on this listing. This is actually the film I like the most on this list. It is the most original, it is to some extent ambitious in its execution, as well as in its concept. I like all the CGI touches, probably what I find most interesting about the film, quite honestly, but I didn't feel it came together in anything really poignant. Really, if you didn't know anything about it, would you really think it was that brilliant? Were you swept up in the reputation, the acclaim, the hype, and want in on what they said they were feeling so bad that you projected their assessments onto this film you really wouldn't have thought much of otherwise? I get the film, although I find its execution no more poignant than a sentence describing its sentiments. I do not get the acclaim that this project receives, and I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to find so impressive about this whole thing in execution. As excited as I would be if Malick had told me that he was working on a film with such a premise, but thinking about a story that counterposes a father-son relationship with the beginning of the universe, it does sound compelling, but then seeing it, it's really like, what sanctimonious twaddle. What a contrived, forced frame device this all is. I'd probably kick myself for ever thinking up a conceited, painfully maudlin feature premise as this one. More the actual frame device than what the frame device is trying to achieve, but trying to spin emotion by insisting we find this story about someone's family so mesmerizing, let alone a means to distill some fundamental magic of perceived existence. No, I just don't buy it. It does not move me. I think I don't feel a fundamental beauty in the existence of life itself. A capacity, yes, but I find it hard to get sentimental about anything, and it feels self-absorbed when I do. I have no reason to assume my experience is any more valid than anyone else's, and trying to find beauty or profundity in something just for its own sake, no, I want to be caught off guard. I want emotions to sweep me up. I don't feel a sanctity or reverence for existence for its own sake. There are things in life that enchant me, but that's partly because I don't think existence is enriching for its own sake. That's partially why those enchanting things are so enchanting. They make the mundane magic. Now, for fear of sounding as pretentious as some of those who've written positive appraisals of The Tree of Life, let us now move on. 5. Days of Being Wild. I have a lot of admiration for director Wong Kar-wai. This wasn't always the case, however. My first exposure to Wong Kar-wai was via this film, possibly at one time his most acclaimed, and it poisoned me at first on his work. When I viewed In the Mood for Love, eventually I didn't care for it much either, for I admired it a lot more than Days of Being Wild, and within a year I felt compelled to rewatch In the Mood for Love and became an admirer, and I admire it even more now. I was convinced of these films from the East, so insistent on being human and moving and adored by critics in the West, with a vague Orientalist fervour. I didn't appreciate sheer emotion or a contrived understanding of a beauty, and I really still don't. I was far too negative to appreciate what I thought was supposed to be appreciated in this director's films. Really, had I not been exposed to Days of Being Wild, I would have sooner, I think, appreciated right away what In the Mood for Love was actually going for. I wound up being a big fan of films such as Ashes of Time, potentially my favourite of his features, Fallen Angels, Happy Together. I actually like 2046 as well. Still, I kind of hate Days of Being Wild, actually. At this time, in this place, we'll meet again. And I will be a complete jerk to you, but because I'm Leslie Chung and I'm an absurdly massive pop star in real life, the audience will buy that you become smitten with me. And you're supposed to feel sorry for me, this audience, when my aunt refuses to tell me who my real parents are after all this time. What soap opera dreck! I once went on to Noel Oakeshott about how rubbish this film was, years ago, and he couldn't help but chuckle, shrug, and say, well, yeah, kinda. He had nothing! Noel Oakeshott. How is it possible to defend this film? No English language drama could get away with this tepid nonsense. I have very rarely felt more, are you joking? When considering an acclaimed film, and a very highly acclaimed film at that. This is unique amongst the very acclaimed films, in that I do not see its appeal at all, beyond some evidence of directorial finesse. I don't think the screenplay of the film is good at all. I'll also say this, I'm not a major fan of Chungking Express, but I can see why people appreciate it. There certainly is a great visual majesty to some of that film. Even without Days of Being Wild, Chungking Express would be a film that I ultimately wouldn't feel motivated to place on this list, even though I do not love it, or even just like it all that much. Nearly as much as most other people profess to do. I still feel it has enough going for it, I get the acclaim to some extent, that I would never feel like placing it on this list if Days of Being Wild, hypothetically, did not even exist. Will we get to a moment where people look back on Days of Being Wild, especially in light of Wong Kar-wai's multiple much superior films, and finally say, was this movie even that great? What were we all on about? And younger generations will be thinking, this Wong Kar-wai film isn't as good as those other ones. What's the deal? I don't know. I don't know why this made the critics adore it at that time. Maybe to the critics in the Chinese language discourse, they appreciated components of it that reflected the arts that were more familiar to them, that had appealed to them more, a certain cultural specificity that is maybe a bit lost from those who weren't raised or aren't from a certain region. But yeah, I don't know what Western or English language critics claim to see in this movie. A film in the English language would never get away with this for English language audiences, but maybe some other cultures would appreciate its contrived melodrama, hackneyed characterizations, and forced emotional resonance, carrying an arrogant assumption that it will inevitably move people, which I find wholly off-putting, especially when the emotional substance of the film is so shallow, which is totally non-existent. I'm not a fan. 4. Requiem for a Dream. Oh, drugs are bad. Yeah, very fucking compelling. Most of the people who admire this movie, I'm willing to bet, because anyone I know who in person has admired this movie, takes drugs. Oh, not those drugs. The movie isn't specific. It is targeting a class of drugs, but the message is clearly one about drugs. Lots of the people who dislike it also take or took drugs, that is also true. Hacky music video editing ethos, overrated score from Mansell, overrated acting performances from old women that men pretend to find moving because they want to appear sensitive to women, Want to feel sorry for an old lady? Try the opening scene of a horror film. Yes, a horror film. 2004's The Ordeal, directed by Fabrice Duels. There is nothing about this movie that people actually like. If they just like coming across as sensitive, okay, stop taking drugs if you find this movie so powerful. Help out at a retirement home if you find this movie so powerful. Go help out addicts at a rehab if you find this movie so powerful. Praising this movie is just a fucking performance. Hey guys, I like this thing that we all like. Can I belong now? If this wasn't known, if it didn't have any major reputation, it would just be considered a needlessly expensive PSA. And that's all it is. And that's all it should have ever been considered. I don't even dislike Darren Aronofsky, but really I sort of do. I actually adore Pi, I do. What a feature debut. Better than AOD's feature debut, not on YouTube because of all the copyrighted music that was used in it, on a similar part of films that inspired it, like Eraserhead and Tetsuo the Iron Man, and may even claim it to be one of my favourite movies in general. The rest of it, though, The Fountain may be a better Tree of Life on account of it having more CGI, but I still consider it on relatively similar terms. But it is better than both that and fucking Horrid Cloud Atlas, and also fucking Anderson's Magnolia, which didn't quite make the top 10 because I know a lot of film fans, even some of PDA's own fans, have expressed feeling a bit underwhelmed by it. Or something like Cameron Crowe's Vanilla Sky. I will have to revisit The Fountain one day and see how much value I find in it. The Wrestler is okay, pretty basic, just some actor man movie. I don't have much positive or negative to share about it. Black Swan is okay, some decent visuals, but the most hackneyed and scaffolded of protagonists going mad films you could imagine, other than that overrated nothing actor man predictability that was 2004's The Machinist. You know, the most scaffolded and hackneyed of those that also received quite significant acclaim. Noah is fun for what it is. Dumb movie, but at least it wasn't at all pretentious. You would have to threaten to kill someone I love, the handful of them that exist, to get me to watch Mother, The Whale, or Caught Stealing. Threaten to kill me, fine. I'd rather not watch them. But if it's someone else, okay, I'll watch the films then. Actually, if it was between killing some stranger or watching these movies, I'd have to ask who the stranger is and what they're like. I'd weigh my options. I saw the Caught Stealing trailer so many times going to the cinema so much in 2025 that it saw me off going to the movies a lot in 2026, as is AOD needing money to fund So Says the Manifest production, which Gerald Bruckner's money also goes toward. Gerald Bruckner is responsible for every word in the history of AOD, of the YouTube channel. AOD himself just reads it all out, or whatever the hell is going to get AOD in less trouble. But that's what the case is. Now, a lot of people have professed to not like this guy, Aronofsky. I know if you're into Goddard or Bergman or Antonioni, you probably turn your nose up at Aronofsky. That's fine. You should. And so I would hesitate to dedicate a whole slot to the films of Aronofsky, although Requiem has been so canonized, at least in the more casual or entry-level world of film enthusiasts, that I couldn't help but place it on the list. And place it so high, because unlike most of the other films on this list, I would say this movie is just fucking terrible. Okay, Funny Games, it's more because of the reputation. As I said, if no one had seen it or if no one liked it, I'd dismiss it as shock fare and just move on. Days of Being Wild is the other one on here that I really don't like. Although had it no reputation, I'd just consider it forgettable rather than outright terrible. No matter how many people had seen it or liked it, I'd consider Requiem for a Dream to be fucking terrible. Vacuous, banal premise, and I don't like the execution. And so I have zero reasons to at all like this movie. And I question why anyone else would actually. Are you really that moved by the notion that drugs are bad? Did you really just want to feel what everyone else claimed to be feeling so badly? I thought you were against peer pressure and taking drugs. You might think watching a movie is harmless compared to drugs. It generally is. Although at least drugs might make you feel good and not act like a fake. Compared to how you will be if you pretend to like Requiem for a Dream, the movie doesn't make you feel good, it's a pretty shitty movie, but in being fake, you decided to find it amazing because everyone told you it's what makes you human and cool, is being an admirer of fucking Requiem for a Dream. Yeah, this is my least favourite movie in the 10. That's what I'm going to claim here. Number 3. Just Wes Anderson in general. We'll go through his films chronologically. Okay. I'm on board with Anderson for Bottle Rocket. I think I love it. I got it. It was cozy, it made those of us born too late, I was born the year the film came out, envious of being a young adult during its decade of release. Here is when I think Anderson works. You'll come to realise that it is not Anderson's films individually I dislike, well, two of them quite immensely, although I dislike the characteristics as displayed across his multiple features, and have no patience to view anything he's directed after 2014's The Grand Budapest Hotel. That film I didn't dislike, I admire it about as much as I admire any of his live-action films technically, although despite that, I was never motivated to watch anything else he directed that came out. Afterward, The Phoenician was showing at many cinemas I visited last year. I just could not be bothered. I don't like Rushmore at all. Cutesy garbage. Oh look, he's doing a play of Serpico. The director likes Serpico. I like Serpico. We're hip tee. Bill Murray, yay! Coming of age, yay! I hate coming of age garbage. What narcissistic rubbish. Not all of us had the good fortune to have your daydream coming of age scaffold screenplays. Actually, most of us don't. It's for cliquey little rodents and people obsessed with their own uninteresting life stories. I have no time for Rushmore, and one person I know who was a big fan was a narcissistic error of a human being with the initials HH. I didn't even finish the Royal Tenenbaums. I'd rather open up a hole in my wrist than sit through that thing, knowing I'm at my age and spend 2 hours watching that, as opposed to doing anything else with my time to help others, to mend my own life, to learn a new topic, to work on my writings. No, watching the Royal Tenenbaums. That thought just makes me sick to my stomach. Yeah, Steve Zissou is pretty fun. I won't deny any of you that. Darjeeling Limited is very good. I think that's one of his 3 best films. Fantastic Mr. Fox is his best film. A lovely adaptation of a little book I've loved since I was about 7 years old. Moonrise Kingdom is okay, a very pretty movie if nothing else, and Grand Budapest is a stupendous production. Shitty script, but it was great to look at. Can't be fucked watching anything else beyond that, at least that he has released thus far, including Isle of Dogs, French Dispatch, Asteroid City, Henry Sugar, and Phoenician Scheme. I don't like the whole, oh, isn't this cute, aren't we special and interesting for finding it cute? But really they're the most cliquey, brutish, bullying, nasty shits, even though they act like they're all sensitive and quirky and accepting. I don't detest any director's fans more, I think, than the openly narcissistic, like me, please don't bully me, bully other people instead. Evil that is the Wes Anderson fan base. I want to take an aluminium baseball bat to those fake sewer rats. The film discourse ought to have known better and savaged him for still making movies after Grand Budapest Hotel. There was nothing I detest more than narcissism. I don't like this, oh, some people are allowed to openly love themselves and they're quirky and fantastic, but other people we describe as arrogant and vain and annoying. Guess what? Outside of being an above-average girl, openly liking yourself is absolute social suicide. So either be okay with everyone liking themselves or no one liking themselves. I err on the side of humility. I don't think people should like themselves. They should like each other and learn how to be a good person without thinking that they're amazing or whatever. Because if you're amazing, does that mean other people are less amazing? Or is everyone amazing, which would mean that no one is? You sure don't act like everyone is amazing, just you and your ominously aging friend groups. Actually, Wes Anderson represents a lot of what is wrong in society, and if he had been eliminated after Bottle Rocket, it would have prevented the exacerbation of one of the most malignant tumours in the history of English language culture, or at least in my own personal, subjective opinion. Number 2. The Shawshank Redemption. I know a lot of people who consider themselves true film fans might be turning their nose up at this movie too, although it is so canonized, so widely considered one of the 5 best movies ever made by casual film fans or the general public. Think about it. To the general public, it's The Shawshank Redemption, The Godfather, Citizen Kane, 2001: A Space Odyssey, maybe one of the original Star Wars movies. I mean, Shawshank is not even a trace of what any of those are. Let's be real. I know some of you turn your nose up at Star Wars as well, and that's fine, I guess. Shawshank Redemption is a sappy, sentimental, loudly forced, and unsubtle dramatic bore. That overbearing musical score, those repulsive close-ups of moved men, constantly being elbowed, told how to feel. Few films were less willing to let the emotional prowess of its plot, if any, speak for itself. I really don't care much for it. If this didn't have a reputation, no one would give a stuff about it. You've all been conned. I don't know how it got there. It wound up at number 2 on the IMDb top 250 behind The Godfather. It had a very strong reputation, especially because people like to champion it as underrated and the best Oscar bait, if we want to use that as a category, film of the 1990s. Okay, that may be true. It's better than crap like The English Patient, Titanic, Forrest Gump and Dances with Wolves. Okay. For a certain video rental pathos, Shawshank was one of the best movies you saw from a purely traditionalist, sentimental crap point of view, and they voted it to the top of the IMDb Top 250 early on, and so ratings that resembled the most common rating were highlighted more, to prevent vote brigading, so they claim, and so people based on its exalted status felt the need, the preconceived bias, that they were more impressed by the film's dramatics than they would otherwise be if they had no idea of its status. They were sucked in by a lie, in my own personal opinion. Then The Godfather Dark Knight Wars of 2008 led the number 2 spot, Shawshank Redemption, to win out over Eva, and its reputation soared. Oh, considered best movie ever. Oh, I can see why it is. You just projected the elevated majesty onto it. It doesn't exist if this is some film you have no idea what other people think of it. I happen to have read the original novella that this is based on, and it is pretty good. I never would have felt the need to adapt it with such conviction, but it does so, and it plays Stephen King as an important individual within the context of the alleged film canon. He wrote the novel that the best film of all time is based on. I mean, I like Stephen King, but really, the best film of all time is based off of Stephen King work, and not even in a very abstract and then the author hates it way, like Kubrick's The Shining, or even an absurdly effective auteur's passion horror feature like Harry Salem's Lot or Misery. I mean, come on. Really? I don't care much for Frank Darabont's other feature films, all but one based off of Stephen King's writings, actually. I prefer The Green Mile. It has a decent atmosphere, but it still suffers from a lot of the same problems as Shawshank Redemption, in my opinion. I saw a bit of The Majestic on TV, it did absolutely nothing for me, and The Mist I think is really overrated. I didn't get much out of it, and I am surprised so many people say they did. I sort of felt that I would like it, but it just didn't really appeal much to me. He hasn't actually directed a feature film since then. I guess why would he? He's cemented his status in cinema history with Shawshank Redemption, and with Green Mile to some extent also. He can get any job he wants with those credentials. His ego is sated. He can sit down and just relax. And given that he's not really a great director, or even an interesting one, it makes sense that he doesn't really feel like making movies if he doesn't have to. He's had his fill. He was some sub-talent mediocrity who got way further than he really deserved. He's just resting now. He doesn't need to work again. No one is demanding that he does. He thinks he's brilliant and doesn't need to prove it. I'm perfectly happy if he never ever considers directing another film for the rest of his life. Truly. Number 1. Godard's films pre-Contempt, and a few afterward as well, actually. This is the most annoying one to explain. I don't like having to be in the position of saying the man is a genius, although there are many misfires, including several of the works people love. Some, actually probably very, very, very few, love everything which Godard was responsible for. More still, detest everything he helmed. Most commonly, there are those who love the classics out of obligation, but express cautious disappointment for the rest, not willing to applaud anything without a significant critical backing behind it. I think the most sensible position on Godard is to be a slavering admirer of the works you consider to be genius, and skeptical of what you subjectively perceive to be his excesses, his vain work, for disinteresting projects and ones which you found forgettable by comparison. My own take falls into this camp, although my choices for the duds include some of the adulated classics within his body of work. I feel like I must be doing something wrong, but I sooner feel as though, while the film discourse acknowledges Godard as a genius, correctly I believe, they don't do it right. Yes, Contempt, Alphaville, Pierrot, Le Fou, 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, La Chinoise, Far From Vietnam, Weekend, that highly compelling 70s era, the 1990 feature Nouveau Vague, and his outstanding 21st century work. Arguably his most impressive era, and the one which is probably most dismissed on the whole. His 80s work has seen a revival by some bored types, though I don't feel it deserves a revival or much attention in the first place. No to the features prior to the Contempt, most of the others from the 60s, not most. I'll praise a film like any other and Sympathy for the Devil as well. No to the 80s, no to that bloated, generally worthless Histories du Cinema. Yeah, that covers my position in a nutshell, effectively. My everything this highly prolific director did as a genius claim goes to not quite Herzog, though I mostly love everything Herzog has ever done, but even more consistent and impressive in quality is quite possibly Mr. Fassbinder. I want to focus on the pre-contempt set in particular, and Band Apart may as well be in this set for me too, actually. I don't like these films for cineasts to elbow at each other and chuckle. I don't like these bourgeois kids acting like they're so much more radical and hip than the people actually doing the working, because one has pretended to absorb the information from a book, and the other hasn't had time to even read a book due to working an arduous job. The appeal of these films is to film fans. It is for film fans to like each other and themselves more. I don't think these films appeal to non-film enthusiasts and people who aren't art students who think and hope they're better than most of the population anyway. That's certainly all Breathless is. Who really finds much value in 61's A Woman is a Woman? Vivres of V is liked by men as a film about women by men. Some women may like it out of obligation. Some women will do anything if they think it upsets conservatives, including demean women, oddly, cutely enough. The Little Soldier, who even remembers that one? A Married Woman, now after contempt, but the same effective set. Band Apart, the most guilty of the prior mentioned, appealing to elbowing, chuckling art or film student types who so revere Goddard's Breathless. I can't be bothered with Made in USA, Masculine, Feminine, and Joy of Learning. Get rid of him. I think we still overrate the film's pre-contempt, and a couple of from 64, I would say, because of where they seem to fit in the wider Goddard story. If Goddard had retired prior to contempt, I won't say died, because then the films would increase in currency for the wider culture. I don't know if we would feel as though the films aged well, or have as much value to say to a contemporary audience beyond the I'm hipper than the average person bullshit, which people of many left-wing dispositions generally try to avoid now. Some in the US still insist on it, like the problem with the right is that they're idiots, not that they're fascists. If those ended up being his only films, he would be considered such a relic, honestly. It isn't on me to explain why these aren't brilliant, it is on you to explain why they are. On AOD, there are articulations as to why Contempt, Alphaville, Weekend, and Pierrot Le Fou are brilliant. Find similar justifications for the lesser Goddard films mentioned here, if you possibly can. There was also an upload for Vladimir et Rosa, which is also rather praised. I will never doubt him as possibly the greatest director of all time. No, really. But we really need to have a sea change in how we assess his works. What's most remarkable is I don't think he displays any of the genius of Contempt onward, most of Contempt onwards anyway. In those prior films, it comes and goes with him, like he fluctuates between lucid, brilliant originality and these vain, self-obsessed, celebrity-seeking expressions of pride that make you question how he composed Contempt, yet also the dull vanity of Breathless, the genius and unpredictability of Alphaville, yet also the mundane, cheeky cliches, I guess it felt original at the time, the 90s hadn't happened yet, of the self-appreciating, ruthlessly smug Band Apart, the vibrance and zeitgeist mining of Pierrot Le Fou, yet also the virtue-signaling, look at me make a film about a woman, and a sex worker at that, opportunism and cynicism of Vivre sa vie, in my opinion, the total wonder of Weekend compared with the celebration of radical politics as cultural chic in The Joys of Learning. It reminds you of Isaac Newton obsessing over Bible code whilst discovering the concept of gravity in his spare time. People who hate Goddard in general will be saying all of the things I'm saying, but applying it to all of his films. I will insist that the genius films are genius, and there's quite a sum of them too, and that if the lesser films didn't exist, the haters would become fans. Most of you just hate Breathless, for some usually understandable reasons, and have it in for him after that. I saw Alphaville first, as a science fiction fan. Adored it. Yeah, greatest director of all time, why not? I guess I am a Goddard fan. And then I didn't like Breathless at all, and never have. Though I checked out Contempt, and totally just loved it, so... I've been trying to grapple with this ever since, really. Where I most diverge from the canon is when I say that Breathless is worthless, or rather its only worth is allowing Jean-Luc Godard to direct more films subsequently, and he did become an utterly genius director, the utterly genius director that the fans of Breathless would describe him as, but I would say rather for up to 20 or so, or more, other films which were not Breathless. Thank you for watching. I hope I didn't upset too many of you. I wouldn't have done this video, but I was goaded into it by a commenter, and it seemed like it might be mildly fun to do. And it was. It got almost depressing, but I had to examine why I never took the beauty of life, appeals to sentimentality, all that seriously. You know, I only ever saw, these rich kids who like to mock and bully others, talking about how poignant some hackneyed, sanctimonious, pandering slop is. You have to understand, a lot of the films on here are films that people like to use to demonstrate their alleged humanity, whilst almost all of the people who are proud to publicly like the film also believe in social cliques, cool and uncool, in being nasty to others who have been designated losers, and in doing whatever is necessary in order for other people to like them. What would that have entailed in late 1930s Germany? That tells you everything you need to know about these people, frankly. I will not be doing more lists like this unless I get requests. I'm happy to discuss and upload the 20 to 11 portion of this list, and even go through the 35 to 21 in an upload after that. I had 35 potential slots, which I then ranked. These films do not impress me. Even films I have criticised in an AOD upload for, an FOTD for, contains enough merits that I could never include it here, or even just, I bothered to upload an FOTD for it in the first place. Whereas, I would never even consider doing that for any of the films listed here. I just have too much disdain for them, I have to say. Remember, everything ever written, every word for this YouTube channel is Gerald Bruckner's. Spoken out aloud by AOD. Yes, everything. It is AOD's voice, Bruckner's words. AOD's films, you'll be seeing So Says the Manifest as a free MP4 download, as Pandemonium is, later in this year. Hopefully you'll find it enriching. Bruckner's life, which ought to be ruined instead, in case anyone ever wants to burn anyone's life based upon anything that has been said or ever will be said via the AOD YouTube channel. Anything controversial ever said on this channel, whatever ensures AOD gets more money for his films in future, that's who's responsible for any opinions shared via this channel that are read out by AOD. Which is to say, after this video, Bruckner, all the way down, just AOD reading out Bruckner's script in between holding Zoom auditions, rehearsing in person, scripting and planning some shoots. Have the best day of your life, and if it isn't, well, we'll just have to fix that soon then, aren't we? No, really, if you want to improve your day, get a glass of your drink of choice, pop on some music you like, think about someone or thing you love, and think about why that thing made you like life more. That's the beauty in life, not life itself. It is hubris and privilege to say that life is beautiful in and of itself. But to identify what motivates you and how you can bring order to the chaos, justify to yourself you're wading through suffering. That's far more useful, logical, and real than pretending life is beautiful because you think others around you will assess you a certain way. Hope this was entertaining. If this is the first video you've ever seen for this channel, hopefully some other work on here will impress you more so than I assume this did.